Shabbat Shalom. This Shabbat we read Parshas Lecha, and in it God appears to Abraham for the first time and tells him, of course, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, go from your land to the land that I will show you. Parshas Noach, which comes right before this in Chassidut, is called by the Baal Shem Tov the Amud HaTfilah, the pillar of prayer. In other words, that since in Parshas Noach, Noah doesn't really pray for the world. He survives the world and he's righteous, but he doesn't seem to pray. He almost doesn't talk at all in the whole Parsha. And so last week's Parsha is considered by many Kabbalists to be the time of the tikkun of prayer, of trying to fix the notion of prayer. But I would argue that it's really this week's Parsha, which is about prayer. Avraham is the one who prays. In a certain sense, perhaps Avraham is the fixing of the Parsha that came last week of Noach. Avraham asks for his own needs. He asks for the needs of the people of Sodom. God tells him, you're going to be a blessing to the whole world. Essentially, your prayer will be for the whole world. So this seems to be the Parsha that's really about prayer. The Gemara says that if we want to figure out how to pray, there are instructions. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Eliezer said, Hoset tfilaso keva, ain't tfilaso tachanunim. That if you make your prayer fixed, your prayer is not supplication. What does it mean if you make your prayer fixed, your prayer is not supplication? So the Gemara says, my keva. What does it mean, a fixed prayer, that somehow is bad? Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi said in the name of Rabbi Yoshia, Kol shetfilaso dome alav kimasai. Anyone whose prayer is like an obligation, a burden. If your prayer is a burden to carry or an obligation to be fulfilled, that's called a prayer that is keva, that's fixed, and that's not the right kind of prayer. The Rabbanan Amri, the rabbis say, that you don't have to so much worry about your intent, or maybe you have to actually worry about it plus something else, and that is you have to worry about your language. As long as your language is in the language of beseeching God, tachanunim, so that's what matters. Rav Yosef said no. That you have to be able to say something new in your prayer. That's the key. You have to go beyond just not seeing it as a burden. You have to go beyond using a language of beseeching. You actually have to really be saying something new. It has to actually be personally about you at that moment being present. That's what it means to say something new. The Mishnah Berurah says an interesting thing. He says, this is the Chavetz Chaim who wrote a commentary on Shulchan Aruch. He says, even though you say it in the language of tachanunim, the language of beseeching, if you're not thinking about your prayer in a way of needing something, you have to ask for your needs and you have to feel like you need something from God. That you need something, and that you're coming to beseech before the king. If you just think you're praying to fulfill an obligation, that's not enough. You have to feel that you're coming to ask God, to beseech from God for your needs. And in fact, the Gemara does say that asking for your needs is a primary part of prayer, a part of prayer that one has to have present. And this seems to fly in the face of another Gemara. The Gemara says, three things recall the sins of a person, I guess, to the Beit Din in heaven. One of them is iyun tefillah, focusing very carefully on prayer. Now, that sounds like a good thing. So what does it mean, iyun tefillah? The answer is it means that if, the way Rashi puts it, that if you're depending on your prayer to get your prayer heard, in other words, if you're praying just because you want God to give you something, so that's not a good thing. It seems to be in contradiction to the earlier Gemara. On the one hand, the Mishnah Berurah, and it seems the Gemara itself is saying that it shouldn't be like a burden, but it should be tachanunim. You should actually be asking for what you really need. On the other hand, it sounds like iyun tefillah, that if you're relying on your prayer to get your prayer heard, to ask for something, you're expecting it to be fulfilled, you're expecting it to be answered, so that's a problem. So what's the difference between these two? How can we put them together? Or how, on the one hand, can we say that your prayer should not be just fulfilling an obligation? It should be really about feeling in need before God. It should, and personally so, right? If you're going to be machadesh badavar, you're going to have something new in your prayer. It means you're really going to be present in terms of what you as an individual need at that moment. And yet it sounds like we should not be praying iyun tefillah. We should not be praying just to get something. I think the idea might be, there was a famous rabbi who said we shouldn't see God as a big vending machine in the sky. In other words, maybe there is a difference, on the one hand, between praying for our needs, which is a good thing, and our personal needs at that moment, being fully present to say, I'm lacking. A person in a certain way has to be lacking in order to truly pray, in order to feel dependent on God. Maybe that's different than saying, okay, I'm praying in order to get something. It's a little hard to distinguish between them, but I think there really is a fundamental difference between them, and that's what it is. We should pray as if we are in need. There has to be bakasha, beseeching God. There has to be tachanunim. There has to be about me and what I need at this moment. And yet at the same time, it cannot be about trying to get something from God. So this is a time when I think a lot of us are trying to figure out how to pray. It is the Corona era when we are indeed in need in new ways, in need in a lot of ways that maybe we didn't realize we were. A lot of people in need, and we're all trying to figure out how to pray. We can't necessarily rely on the communal prayer that we used to rely on. Not all of us can make it to shul, but I think maybe this is the lesson of this week's parsha, of learning from Abraham how to pray, how to really be present and ask for what we need and feel that sense of need, but at the same time not to view God as a vending machine, to view God as a true other. Shabbat Shalom.